Welcome to another episode of the Traditional Animation Show. I am your host, Lavelle Lee, here with an exciting interview with Disney director Steven Anderson, who directed Disney's latest hand-drawn animated film, Winnie the Pooh. Steven started his animation career in 1988 when he attended California Institute of the Arts. While at CalArts, he went to work for Hyperion, where he got to work on his first feature film, Rover Dangerfield. Steven is still working for Disney Feature Animation, where he is one of the few guys still storyboarding on paper. He is also a professor at CalArts, teaching young artists and animators for over 10 years. Be sure to stick around after the interview for a professional storyboard lesson from Steven himself. You don't want to miss this one, but enough talk from me. On to the interview. Hey, Steve, thanks for coming.
Hey, Lavelle, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to jump right into it.
Excellent.
When was your first aha moment?
Aha moment. It's really interesting because I feel like I have always loved to draw and loved Disney animation and animation in general since I was about this big. My aha moment must have happened really early in life because my whole life has sort of been responding to that aha moment. The one thing that does stick in my head as far as an aha moment, I was about 13 years old, and there was a college tour that the Disney Studios conducted, and they had groups of artists going around the country to different colleges, doing a little song and dance about Disney and how Disney in the 80s was going to be a great thing, and recruiting artists and things like that.
Cool.
And so I was living in Pennsylvania at the time, and they came to one of the local colleges, and I heard about it. My teacher told me at school. So I ran home and I said, Dad, we gotta go. So my dad said, okay, came home from work tired, but all right, we'll go. Packed into the car, we went to the school. And on stage were several artists, one of them being John Musker, who ironically enough I've ended up working with for the last few years at Disney, so that was kind of a funny coincidence. But also up on stage was Eric Larson. One of the 9 old men, one of Walt Disney's 9 old men, and one of the person that was really responsible for training the new generation of animators from the 70s through the 80s. And I knew who he was because Illusion of Life had come out a few years before. And so I brought drawings to show him, and after the presentation was over, we went up to the stage, and I showed him my drawings. I met Eric Larson, and I showed him my drawings. I said, what do you think? And he pulled them out, and the first thing he said was, you got to start drawing your own characters, son, because all I brought were Disney characters that I copied, because that's what I love to do. I love copying all kind of cartoon characters, but Disney in particular. So, okay, I took that to heart, and from then on I did that. But then the second thing he said was, but you put down a good line, kid. And I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. Eric Larson told me I put down a good line. That's not, it's one sentence. It was very, lighthearted and everything, and not that I was going to give up at that moment. It wasn't like it made me stay on the path, but it just said to me, okay, you're going in the right direction. This guy has given you his endorsement as kind of comical as it was. And so I was really stoked leaving that. So I guess I would say that was sort of a kind of an aha moment for me.
That is so cool.
Yeah, it was great. I'm really honored that I got a chance to meet the man.
Wow. Well, so what is your biography? Like your background and where you come from and
My family's from the East Coast, from Pennsylvania. I've lived all over the place. I was born in Georgia, lived in Colorado, lived in Pennsylvania, lived in Texas, then came out to California to go to CalArts in 1988. And then that was kind of the start of everything. I went to CalArts for 3 years, started working while I was a student at a couple different jobs during the summer. One of them was back in Dallas, which is where I had moved to California from. It was a little tiny studio in somebody's house. Guy's name was Dan Peeler. And my first animation job was painting cells. They did for local animation, and they put me to work right off the bat, and I was painting cells. And then I think I did some in-between work, and I got to do my first bit of professional animation there.
Wow.
And that was kind of fun.
Cool.
It was a horrible animation. I'm so sorry to Dan Peeler's studio for having to have that in their film. But it was a pretty big deal for me. And then back to CalArts. Then I started working at a studio called Hyperion. and I was an animating assistant there on Rover Dangerfield. I was an animator on Bebe's Kids.
Wow.
I did some storyboards for TV. I did some visual development and storyboards for some features that they had in development. And then eventually I migrated into directing some of their television shows there at Hyperion. And then that was on to Disney Features in '95, where I've been for the last 20 years as a story artist and a director.
What's your background? What is your biography?
Well, I was born in Georgia, and I was actually adopted. That's where I was adopted by my birth family, and then we moved all over the place. My dad was a mechanical engineer in the baking industry. He worked for Keebler, and then he worked for Frito-Lay. So we moved from Georgia to Colorado, where he transferred jobs to Keebler. Then he moved to still with Keebler, moved to Pennsylvania, and that's where my family is from originally, is kind of central eastern Pennsylvania. And then he transferred to Frito-Lay. So then we moved to Dallas, the Dallas area in Texas, because that's the headquarters of Frito-Lay was there. And through all that time, I was drawing cartoons. I was watching animation. I was going to the movies. Strict diet of Disney movies for up until Star Wars. That was my first PG movie. It was scandalous. We're going to go see a PG movie. I couldn't believe it because everything up to that point was G, and it was all that meant predominantly Disney stuff. But loved animation, Saturday morning cartoons, all kinds of animation. But Disney in particular was. I'm not quite sure the answer to the question. I've often just wondered, what was it about Disney that captivated me? And still to this day, there's just an appeal and a warmth to Disney animation, the Disney style, that I just love. At any rate, as I got older, I started getting more into just movies in general, live action movies, and of course growing up in the 70s and 80s with the films of Steven Spielberg. And as I was really becoming a fan of his work, I started understanding the concept of what a director was, and that got me interested in live action films and really examining that as not something instead of animation, but just something else, something as well as animation to really be passionate about. So film, drawing, animation, screenwriting, all that stuff was in the mix for me. And then I was very fortunate. I applied to Cal Arts my senior year in high school, and I was lucky enough to get in. Wow. And then that was a whole new world of excitement for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so you started at Cal Arts, but how did you get your start in animation?
In animation, like I said, Cal Arts, I started in '88. Some of my summer jobs between years is when I started in animation. Between my first and second year at Cal Arts, I went back home to Dallas, and I got my first ever animation job at a little tiny studio run by a man named Dan Peeler. It was in his house, and they did all kinds of local animation for the Dallas area. My first job was painting cells.
Cool.
Which was really, really interesting and a great. I love the fact that was my entry-level position. Was you can't get more traditional animation than that.
Oh yeah.
But I also got to do my first couple scenes of animation. They gave me a lot of opportunities there. Back to Cal Arts in my for my sophomore year. And then after that, I started at Hyperion Animation, which was in Glendale, California at the time, and started as an animating assistant on Rover Dangerfield, and then stayed at Hyperion for quite a few years. I was an animator on Bebe's Kids, and then moved into storyboarding and directing on some of the television work that they did at Hyperion. So that was Hyperion was really my first true studio experience, and the great thing was it's because it was a small studio, I got to do every project I was doing something different.
Wow.
And that was really cool. It was a great introduction to the production process, the world of creatively, but also schedule wise, and just how you make animation. So I really I loved that experience.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, how did you get your start in directing?
Well, at Hyperion, I think I mentioned
a little bit.
I directed some stuff at Hyperion. There were a TV show that they were doing. They needed to one of the directors that was supposed to be on it he left to go into another project. And I got called into the head of the studio. His name was Tom Wilhite, and he said, "Would you be interested in doing this?" And given that was a dream of mine to direct, from when I was younger, growing up with all those Spielberg movies, and just really loving that idea of being behind the scenes and leading the team to make the movies, to make projects. I said, yeah, I jumped at the chance. So I directed 2 seasons of a crazy animated show called the Itsy Bitsy Spider. It was on the USA Network. It was for Paramount.
Wasn't Jim Carrey the
Animation.
voice in there?
He was the voice in the short that we made first, yes. And then the series was spun off from that short. So he didn't. Matt Frewer, who was Max Headroom, if anybody in the audience knows who Max, it's an old '80s TV show. Anyways, Matt Frewer took over the Jim Carrey role. But yeah, that was one of Jim Carrey's early voice work.
That's cool.
But so that's kind of how I started directing. And then when I got to Disney, I didn't really think about directing at Disney. But the longer I was there, I did a few leadership roles at Disney. I was a story supervisor on 2 movies, Emperor's New Groove and Brother Bear. And watching the production process from that point of view, and working alongside the directors and being in editorial and being in recording sessions, I realized this is really ultimately the same thing that I did at Hyperion for those TV shows that I worked on. The material is obviously very different, but the process is the same. And I thought, I think maybe I could do this. And like I said, I liked leadership roles. I did a lot of leadership things when I was a kid, in church and scouts and school, and I just really enjoyed leading a team. And I thought, I'm gonna mention this to the studio. I said, one of these days I'd like to do that. And they said, okay. And they kept their eye on me, and I did. This was after Emperor's New Groove, and I did one more movie, Brother Bear.
Yeah.
And they said, all right, we feel like you've displayed enough leadership here at Disney. We'll take a shot at you.
Wow.
And so they gave me the script for A Day with Wilbur Robinson, which ended up becoming Meet the Robinsons, my first feature as a director.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So what are some of the skills, say, an animator compared to a or storyboard artist would need? Like, what are the differences between the two? Say, because a lot of students out there who want to be animators or storyboard artists or even directors such as yourself, what are the different type of skills, one compared to the other that they would have to have?
Well, I'll start by answering what is similar between the two, and that's really communicating emotion in your drawings, being able to draw characters and using the expressions on their face, using the body language, understanding good silhouette. A lot of the fundamentals of animation, of animating, do transfer into story sketch, and I think that's important that everybody knows that, particularly for Disney animation. Really what our storyboards are there to do is to develop the characters, create the relationships from all the other characters, and tell that character's story. What's their journey? What is their arc? How do they change throughout the story? That's really what we're doing. So to get to the differences, I just want to quickly mention also what's different about the way Disney approaches storyboarding from other studios is our storyboarding is not simply to plan the shots. Just here's the camera's going to be a close-up, and then we're going to be a medium shot, then we're going to have a pan. It's not just about that.
Yeah.
We're really workshopping our stories in our storyboards, which means as a storyboard artist, you have to there's a lot that you really have to juggle. Yes, you have to understand camera placement and how to shoot something.
Yeah.
But you're staging the action, you're choreographing everything that's happening. You're blocking the scene like you would if you had live actors on a set, and you're acting it out. So it's not just about plotting.
Yeah.
It's really about a full knowledge of filmmaking, so that you understand how to get all of the story points across, and particularly, underline this several times, are you communicating what the characters are thinking and feeling from moment to moment? So again, back to what I was saying at the beginning, in that sense, it's no different than animation, but it's from a much more macro viewpoint as opposed to animating the pieces that are in the movie. You're really talking about telling the whole story.
Yeah. So do you study, you mentioned live action, you study live action? Like, what are some really great movies that you've studied when it comes to live action movies?
Well, I love to do frame grabs and study composition, study the real graphic, just how filmmakers are breaking up that two-dimensional space, the screen, how they're using color, how they're using lighting and composition to tell their stories. So things like West Side Story is such a strikingly visual movie. I've done a lot of that. So The Shining, Stanley Kubrick. Brazil, one of my favorite movies, Terry Gilliam's Brazil. Incredible visuals in that film, amazing visual storytelling, great compositions. So those are some movies that I've looked at. I think also for me, because I'm really fascinated in story structure and the writing end of things. And when I do storyboard still these days, a lot of the sequences that I get are dialogue scenes and character interaction. So I really like to look at movies like Kramer versus Kramer or Broadcast News, some of those movies that I grew up with that really, really taught me about character and about character interactions and about great writing, dialogue writing, relationship writing.
Yeah.
So I like to break that stuff down too. And ultimately, the most elusive beast that I think we all struggle with is just how do you successfully structure a movie? It's it's different every time.
Yeah.
And so I love to break down the structure of movies and watch them with the counter, the time counter playing, so I can see, at 5 minutes this moment has happened, and at 10 minutes this moment has happened, and try to break them down and analyze their structure as well.
Okay. What is the most satisfying thing in directing that you've done so far?
Well, from the broad stroke level, the most satisfying thing about directing for me is just working with the team.
Yeah.
There's nothing better than being on the floor in the trenches, making a movie with the team. The challenges, the setbacks, but also the victory celebrations when you get that our first shot in color or our first shot in animation or our first sequence is all done in color or whatever. Just all those moments. I love that. I love working with the team and just and trying to keep everybody positive and everybody focused, and that's just a great moment for me. Specifically in terms of projects, I know it's not traditional animation, sorry I have to say, but Meet the Robinsons for me was really a high point for me directorially, because not only was it my first movie, but it had a very personal connection to me because I was adopted, and the character in the film is trying to get adopted and questioning where he came from and who his birth mother was, which is something that I've thought a lot about throughout my life. So that personal connection with that film makes that film particularly special. They're all great. I love working on all of them.
Yeah.
So.
But you'll always remember your first.
Yes.
What's the hardest part of directing? Like the absolute hardest part?
The hardest part of directing, I think, today at Disney Animation, I would say it's more of the creative challenge of knowing what your movie is about thematically, not the story, but what's the theme of the movie? What is the big, I hate to say the word message, but what is the statement that the movie is making?
Yeah.
Digging deep, deep, deep into yourself, into whatever your idea is, and really getting deep in there and mining the core idea and how it's going to resonate with our audience. What's going to make it universal? What's going to make it human? What's going to transcend race and place on the globe and age and all that stuff? What's a really core fundamental human value that we can make a movie about? And then once you have that, and that's not easy to get to, but once you have that, then protecting that, making sure that you stay true to that idea, but then also communicating it clearly to your audience. It sounds like an odd thing to say, but I think that's really the toughest thing, because it takes so long to make these movies. We get a lot of feedback from a lot of different sources.
I can imagine.
And it can, if you don't have a sense of what your movie's about and you don't feel strongly about that and can really defend it.
Yeah.
Defend it, that's a little bit more of an aggressive word, but you protect it. Your movie can get pushed and pulled and thrown, all over the place, and before you know it, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know what you're making anymore.
Yeah.
So I think that, to me, in contemporary Disney animation terms for a director, I think that's the biggest challenge.
Okay. Well, you recently celebrated 20 years at Disney.
Yeah.
What is your favorite moment while you've worked for Disney?
Gosh, There's so many favorite moments.
Give us a couple then.
I remember very clearly as story supervisor. I was a story supervisor on Emperor's New Groove, but actually that's not really not important to the story. But storyboarding a scene with a friend of mine, a colleague named Don Hall, who was a director on Big Hero 6 last year, Academy Award-winning friend of mine. But we were sharing a sequence on Emperor's New Groove, the big climax of the movie. When there's a big chase through the palace, and Cusco's trying different potions and he's turning into different animals, and then they go out on the face of the palace and there's a big chase and Yzma turns into the little kitty and all that stuff, the big action sequence. And I'm not really an action guy, but I was doing that sequence with Don. And there was a moment where it was a big sequence. We'd worked for quite a while on it, and we pinned it all up on boards, and we hung all the boards up in the story room. We were going to pitch it to the director. And it was so much work that it circled the entire room, Whoa. Top and bottom story rails.
Whoa.
And I remember just stopping and sitting back and looking at this room with all these drawings that we did, and I thought, I really feel like a story artist right now. I feel like, I remember all those pictures in Illusion of Life and all those Disney books of the story rooms, and seeing Bill Peet and all those other guys with Ken Anderson with all their storyboards pinned up, and looking at that as a kid thinking, wow, that looks like such a fun environment to be in, and could I ever do that someday? And then I stepped back and I thought, I'm here, I'm doing this. And it's kind of the first time, even though that was several years being at Disney, it's kind of the first time that I really felt like, I'm a story artist. I really feel like I can say that. So that was a cool moment.
Cool.
I guess the other one, I'll try to be brief on this one, but the other one would be the first story reel screening we had of Meet the Robinsons. Sorry, I know it's Meet the Robinsons.
That's okay.
But since I had been at the studio, there was, when we would storyboard movies, you would screen, we storyboard them and then we film them and we make story reels out of them. Traditionally, you would storyboard Act 1 and then you'd have a screening of Act 1 and everybody would say, oh, that looks great. Then you would keep going and you'd finish Act 2 and you show Act 1 and Act 2 and everybody goes, oh, that looks great. And then maybe something might start rolling into production. And then finally you finish Act 3 and you screen the whole thing and everybody goes, it's a disaster, it doesn't work, the movie's not working. And then you're throwing out all this production stuff that started, and you kind of got to go backwards and start and rejigger the whole thing.
Yeah.
Well, what they asked us to do on Meet the Robinsons for our first screening is they said, all we want you to do is storyboard the entire movie from A to Z, put it up on reels, and we're going to look at it, and we're going to decide if we want to make it or not.
Wow.
So the first screening of Meet the Robinsons that we had was the entire movie, and since I'd been there, that had never happened before, was screening the entire movie. So that I felt really great. But also, the response from the studio was so positive. And the moment the screening was over and the lights came up, people stood up and applauded for our screening. And because they really connected with the story. They saw a complete idea. It wasn't just part of an idea, which people were used to doing. And that was a real warm, supportive moment, and all the story team, myself, editorial team, we got so many pats on the back for the next few months because people really responded so well to that screening. So I'll always remember that moment as, wow, this was a really special moment.
That's great. So you're also a instructor at CalArts as well as working at Disney. Yep. So can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I've been, I taught quite a while ago from about 96 to 01. And then I moved to Florida, actually, to work on Brother Bear, so it was kind of hard for me to teach at CalArts from Florida. So I backed out of teaching for a while. About 10 years later, I got back into it after Winnie the Pooh was done. CalArts was looking for an instructor, story instructor, and I said, this is great. I just finished a movie, so I've got the time. I'm back in development, so my schedule's not crazy. So I talked to Disney, and they said, yeah, we'll let you do that. So they were very gracious enough to let me teach an afternoon class. So I teach from 4 to 7 every Tuesday, and it's the 3rd and 4th year story class. And it's great. I love it. I love doing it. It's really fun. It keeps me sharp. I think it just there's nothing like trying to communicate what you do, oftentimes from your gut, to people, make that clear and concrete,
and students,
yeah, on top of that. And so I learn as much, I think, as maybe more than they do. Hopefully they learn a lot. But I love doing it. So I'm really happy that I have that chance to do it.
Well, what is one of the number one questions you get from your students?
I think that the number one question I get from my students would be about portfolios, if you want to be a story artist. And it's really tricky, particularly today, with as many studios as are out there, and with all of the digital tools now that people are using for storyboarding, it's kind of made things a little bit grayer in terms of what a storyboard artist is in animation. I feel like when I was getting into story at Disney around 1995 or so, most other feature places pretty much orbited the same sun when it came to storyboarding. And it was all more or less, you could draw it back to the Disney way of approaching storyboarding. It was that very traditional approach.
Yeah.
Now, so you could kind of help people. It was easier to say, well, here's the things that you need to know in order to do that type of storyboarding. And most likely, that's going to apply to all these other studios. Well, now, every studio wants something different. Some studios want boards that are more like an Atomatic, real clean drawings with no tone, lots of perspective grids, because they're going to use those as the blueprint for production.
Yeah.
And then that's one end of the spectrum, and then we're kind of the other end of the spectrum, which is we like to see more gestural, fluid, expressive kind of drawings. Camera work and all that is important, but it's really more about the personality that's in the drawings and how much that artist can get out there.
Yeah.
So I keep telling my students, I can give you the Disney philosophy, and I can give you what Disney wants out of portfolios. Unfortunately, I can't speak to the other studios, and in a way, it's almost like you have to tailor your portfolio now to whatever studio you're sending it to.
Yeah.
There's not that kind of magic bullet portfolio for a story artist, so that makes it a little bit tricky, but I think that's the thing that they're the most concerned with, because they all want to go work and be story artists out in the world. So
Yeah. Well, let's get into some Winnie the Pooh questions.
Okay.
What was it like directing some animation legends like Andreas Deja and Eric Goldberg? What was that like?
Well, my co-director, Don Hall, who I mentioned about the Emperor's New Groove story a while back, my co-director, Don Hall, and I were stoked to be working with that team. I think there was a certain amount of, but we're working with that team. I mean, these are some greats. These are some legends that we're working with.
Yeah.
What was that going to be like? And how would they respond to us as these younger punks that, coming in and directing this movie? But I tell you, from second one of working with that team, there was nothing but support, nothing but collaboration. They're all just amazing artists, amazing professionals, and just amazing people. Yeah. And they love what they do. They were so excited to be working with these characters in particular, because I think these characters hold a special place in so many people's hearts.
Oh, yeah.
But animators like Andreas, for example, I mean, his hero is Milk Call, and he's getting to, he got to do Tigger, and so he's picking up the reins from this one particular character from Milk Call. And so for him, it was just, he couldn't be more excited. He would have gone anywhere, I think we asked him to go. Dale Bear was mentored by John Lounsbury back in the 70s, and John Lounsbury was the first guy to really develop Owl in Winnie the Pooh and the Honey Tree. So now Dale is also kind of stepping into the footsteps of his mentor. That connection to the past and to these these animation greats that all of these guys were mentored by, I think they couldn't have been more excited about it. So we were really lucky. We had a great time with those guys.
Well, what do you think about, picking up the rein and actually directing Winnie the Pooh and Tigger and Eeyore and Piglet? What was that like?
It was a blast. It was weird at first, because I thought, all right, it sounds like it'd be a lot of fun, and I remembered those shorts very well. And I thought, I didn't really have much of a connection with Winnie the Pooh. And the more I thought about it, I thought, no, I had a Winnie the Pooh record that I would go to sleep with. I had Winnie the Pooh jammies. I had all this Winnie the Pooh stuff. And I realized, no, this is a bigger part. I kind of had to sift, kind of clear through the attic a little bit. And then I finally realized, no, Winnie the Pooh was a part of my childhood. It was a big, and we had all the A.A. Milne books, and I remember reading those when I was a kid. So it was pretty exciting to get back into that. Yeah.
What's the story of this little guy here?
This guy, Winnie the Pooh. This
Yes,
guy was this particular Winnie the Pooh was a limited edition set that they sold in connection with the movie, and they were designed. It was all the characters. It was Tigger and Eeyore and Piglet and Kanga, and they were designed to match the ones that we used in our opening titles, the live action opening titles. But there's an interesting story about the actual Pooh Bear that we had in our live action opening titles. He had a really interesting history. Rewind the clock back to 1965-66 when the Disney Studios was making Winnie the Pooh and the Honey Tree, and it was directed by Woolie Reitherman, also one of Disney's 9 Old Men. And they were doing this live action opening, and Woolie said, "We need somebody." He went around the studio and said, "We need somebody to make a stuffed Winnie the Pooh doll to sit on this windowsill for this live action opening." So a man named Bernie Mattinson, who was he is officially a Disney legend. He started the Disney Studios in 1953, directed and produced 2 of my favorite Disney films, Mickey's Christmas Carol and Great Mouse Detective, and who was our story consultant on the movie, on the 2011 Winnie the Pooh. But back in the 60s, Bernie said, "Oh, okay." He heard what Woolie asked, and he went home to his wife and he said, "Hey, this is what's going on. Would you like to try that?" So his wife said, "Great," and she made a stuffed Winnie the Pooh over the course of, I don't know, a couple days or a week or something.
Wow.
So she made that, and Bernie said, "Great, this is really cool." And he grabbed it and he brought it into the studio, and he went to Woolie and he said, "Here, my wife made this." And Woolie said, "Oh, I wish I would have known about it a few days earlier. We already got somebody else in the building to make one. And so we're going to use that one. I'm so sorry." And so Bernie's wife's Winnie the Pooh did not get in the movie. Well, when Bernie told us that story, as he's holding he brought it into the studio, and he's holding his wife's Winnie the Pooh, telling us the story. Don and I looked at each other and said, "That's the Winnie the Pooh that's going to be in our live action opening." Awesome. So we did everything we could to make sure that happened. So the one you see in our live action opening, the 2011 Winnie the Pooh live action opening, was kind of the runner-up of the stuffed Winnie the Pooh from Winnie the Pooh and the Honey Tree.
That's great.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Cool. Well, so fast forward a bit. What are you working on now? Feature film, a short? What you doing now?
I'm developing a new feature at Disney. It's a little early. It's a little too early, unfortunately, for me to talk about it.
Oh, I understand. Okay.
But I'm very excited about it, and looking forward to getting that going.
Yeah.
Personally, I also did a live action short just for something different. That's also not traditional animation, but as well we're sharing. Just a little live action short on my own. A friend of mine from CalArts is producing it, and trying to play in some different sandboxes and stretch and pull, grow.
That's great.
Different ways. So
cool. Well, a question we like to usually ask on every single one of the interviews is, what is it about traditional animation that is special to you?
Traditional animation, to me, represents something that's handmade. I know that there's technology that we use, even in the old days with Disney, obviously with cameras, and there's all kinds of technology.
Yeah.
And of course, some of the later traditional animation had computer-assisted technology.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I associate it with something that is handmade. And I remember my sacred place when I was a kid was my desk in my room, and I loved drawing and painting and coloring with markers and colored pencils and using scissors and glue and making stuff. I love making stuff with my hands. And when I learned more about animation as a kid, I thought, all these amazing images I'm seeing up on screen were made by hand for the most part. Images like a Pinocchio and Fantasia, it's that gorgeous, the color and the effects and the detail. To think that's all painstakingly done by hand, really was exciting to me. So I love that aspect of traditional animation, that it's a handmade craft, even if we use technology to assist us. When you get down to the core of it, it's making movies by hand, and that's really exciting to me.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, would you like to give us a small lesson on storyboarding? So.
I would love to. Yeah.
All right.
Let's
cool.
do it.
All right. Let's do it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lavelle.
All right. Yeah. No problem.
Hi, everybody. This is Steve here. I'm going to talk about storyboarding today, and particularly storyboarding a scene of dialogue. This is the kind of sequence that I get a lot at Disney. at least two characters in some kind of dialogue situation, some kind of conversation. And the trick is always, how do you storyboard it to where you're finding a visual solution for the staging of the idea. So you don't just get two talking heads and a two-shot close-up of talking head, close-up of talking head, over the shoulder, talking head. Sometimes that's acceptable. Sometimes that is the right way to stage a particular dialogue scene. But anytime you can find a visual solution for anything that you're storyboarding, it's always better. So I'm going to talk about how you would do that. Before I do, though, I want to just pause for a second and talk big picture briefly about what is a story. What are the basic building blocks, kind of the fundamentals of a story? Every story, no matter how small, no matter how big, every story at its core has three things: character, conflict, and goal. Every story is about a character who wants something. They have some kind of goal, some kind of objective, and there's conflict in their way. And the events of the story then is the character overcoming those obstacles to try to achieve what they want. That's any story. Every scene in your story actually has the same three fundamental elements to it. Every scene is a step in the process of the character achieving that greater goal. So every character enters every scene with some kind of objective. They have some kind of thing they want to achieve to get their bigger goal, and there's some kind of obstacle in their way. So the first thing you want to do when you're boarding a dialogue scene is you want to go through your script and you kind of want to figure those things out. You want to talk about, okay, what's the character? What is their objective? What are they up against? And what happens at the end of the scene? Do they get the thing they want, or do they lose the thing they want? So I have a little sample script here. I'll get rid of this guy. I have a little sample script here. Very short, very simple for the purposes of this demonstration. But this is our scene. Okay, we have two characters. We have Bob, we have Joe. So I'm going to read the scene, and we'll then talk about how we can stage it. So at the beginning, Bob says, "Hey Joe, I need to borrow $20. Joe says, "No." Bob says, "Come on, man, you know I'm good for it." Joe says, "Good for it? You still owe me $30 from 2 weeks ago." "No." Bob says, "I promise I'll pay it back as soon as I can." And Joe says, "I don't trust you anymore, and we're not friends." So that's the scene. So let's talk about our three things: character, conflict, and goal. Bob is our character who has the objective, right? He's the one that comes in and he wants to borrow money. What's the obstacle? The obstacle is Joe, because Joe will not give him money. What happens at the end of the scene? Bob does not get the money. Bob's pretty confident that he's going to get the money at the beginning, because he doesn't say, "Hey Bob, can I borrow $20? He says, Joe. He says, "Hey Joe, I need to borrow $20, assuming Joe is just going to give it to him, but he doesn't get it. So it's very difficult, and it progressively gets harder and harder for Bob to get that money. Okay, so how do we use this then to board the sequence? The trick is then to go through and isolate the different beats of the scene, and by beat I mean the different changes. What's changing throughout the scene, and those are the things you really want to illustrate. So, for example, Bob says, "Hey Joe, I need to borrow $20. Joe says no. There's a change right there, because Bob expected one thing and he got the opposite. He got no instead of yes. So there's a change right there. Bob responds by saying, "Come on, man, you know I'm good for it." He has to now take a different approach to Joe to get the money. So that's a change in approach. Joe responds and says no again. There's another change in expectation, because Bob thought this new approach will work, but it didn't. So now Bob has to do yet another change of plans. Now he's begging. "I promise you I'll pay you back as soon as I can. I don't trust you anymore. I don't trust you, and we're not friends anymore." Another big change. And now that's the biggest change at the end, because now Bob is even that much farther away from getting the money that he wants. So those are going to be our key points that we're really going to want to work on and visualize. Okay? And then again, big picture, what's changing is Bob's plan of attack is changing, and the emotions of both characters, the emotions of Bob and the emotions of Joe. Bob is getting more and more frustrated and panicked and desperate Joe is getting more and more irritated and angry. Okay, so those are the things we're going to want to track through. So let's start drawing our scene. I'm going to draw really rough and really scribbly because that's how I approach anything at the beginning. I always feel like I can't multitask enough to draw beautifully and try to work out my ideas. So I like to draw really roughly and scribbly so I can work out the ideas and then I'll clean them up later. So the drawings I'm going to do are very loose. But let's just say, let's start with our first panel. So our first panel, I'm going to make the decision that Joe is already going to be in the scene. Joe is the guy that Bob wants to borrow the money from. Joe is already going to be in the scene. And I'm just going to say that he's sitting here. Again, really rough. Okay, he's sitting here. And let's say that he's sitting on a couch. Okay, so there's Joe. He's sitting on a couch. Real simple, real rough. Okay, so let's just say we're going to start there. So now Bob needs to come in and say, I need to borrow 20 bucks. So let's have Bob walk in. We have a nice empty space over here. We have a nice space to stage Bob's entrance. So let's say that Bob walks in, feeling pretty confident. Okay. And I just kind of redraw everything. You don't have to do that necessarily, but I do for, I don't know, because it just feels like the right thing to do. Again, really rough. So Bob walks in and says, again, very confidently, so we're going to do this nice big smile, and he's going to strike this real confident pose. Okay. And Joe is going to look up at him. Okay. And this is where Bob is going to say, hey, Joe, I need to borrow 20 bucks. So this is kind of our first image, our first big image here. This is the relationship we have between Bob and Joe. Okay? Bob is standing, Joe is sitting. So he's going to ask, can I borrow 20 bucks? And Joe is going to say no. Okay. Now visually, we have to underline this. This is our big change here, because he's going to get no for an answer, and now he's going to have to change his plan of attack. So what we want to do is somehow visually represent that with this character right here. So let's say, how can we show that change in attitude? Let's say, he kind of turns away from him. Just simple, because we want somewhere to build. We want to build to it. So he says no, and he turns his head. Let me just throw this background in here really quick. Okay. So now, we want to show now the change in Bob. Okay, Bob now has a new plan of attack. He has to deal with this conflict. All right. So one thing you could do in this situation is let's have Bob sit down next to him. Maybe he even puts his hand on his shoulder. Okay, now we've shown a visual change. We've gone from this to this. Okay, that's our next beat in the scene. And he's going to say, come on, man, you know I'm good for it. Joe is going to say, good for it. Okay. He's going to give his line of dialogue. Good for it. You still owe me $30 from 2 weeks ago. And he says no again. Now this time, visually, we want to now build. We want to show another change. Get this couch in here. Okay. So now this time, what if Joe completely turns his back on him? So now again, visually, we're really showing a change. We're showing this change. Okay. All right. So we've gone from facing him now to turning away from him. That's our next change. That's the unexpected reaction he got. And now Bob is going to have to take yet another approach. And in this case, like we said earlier, it's begging. Come on, man, I promise I'll pay it all back as soon as I can. So we can have Bob get up from the sofa. And now he's getting more desperate. We said that's one of the things we want to really, we really want to visualize. So what if he gets down on his knees in front of Joe this time and starts begging? Come on, man, I really need the money. The next change, Joe not only says no a third time, but he says, I don't trust you and we're not friends anymore. So that's a big door slam in the face of Bob. So what if, to really accent that idea, this time now Joe actually stands up from his position and has this line of dialogue. No, I don't trust you. We're not friends anymore. And leaves, storms out of the scene. Leaving. Yeah. Leaving poor Bob all by himself. Okay. What I want to do now is I want to pin these drawings up, and I want to go through and let's talk about visually. We'll really be able to see the visual changes and how that reflects the changes in the script. Okay, so I pinned up the dialogue strips, and I'm going to pitch the scene, and we'll look at it and see how it plays. Okay, so we start with Joe sitting on the couch, and Bob walks in and says, "Hey, Joe, I need to borrow $20. Joe says, "No." And he looks away. Bob sits down. "Come on, man, you know I'm good for it." "Good for it," says Joe. "You still owe me $30 from 2 weeks ago." "No." He turns his back to him. Now Bob gets up and walks over and gets on his knees and starts begging to Joe, "Please, I promise I'll pay it all back as soon as I can." And Joe stands up and says, "I don't trust you anymore, and we're not friends." He walks off, leaving Joe standing, kneeling all by himself. So that's kind of our scene. Again, you can see the power struggle. You can see how visually we've worked that out. Now what you can do too is if we sort of treat this as our master shot, If you want to go in, this could be the scene. It could be all staged from one camera perspective. That's okay. Or this is a great place now that you can start building. You can start adding close-ups if you want into this master. So for example, I have a few here like on this scene. Come on, man, you know I'm good for it. You could start here and then you could go into a close-up of Bob finishing that line of dialogue. You could go into a close-up then of Joe saying, good for it, you still owe me $20, no, and then you could just go cut back out wide to have him turn around. As Bob walks over and starts to beg, you could go to a close-up of the begging. Pay it back as soon as I can. You could throw in a close-up of Joe then saying, I don't trust you anymore. I don't trust you and we're not friends. Go back to the magic of paper and pins. Go back out to your wide shot to have Joe walk off screen and then end on this image. So this is a great place to start, but the most important thing is that what we've done is we've taken our script, we've kind of analyzed it and broken it down to its elements, and we've then found a way to visualize each of those building blocks and the things that are changing in the scene. So you always want to be identifying what's changing and how can I take those things and visually present them so that they're clear to the audience. All right? So thanks so much. Thank you, Lavelle and traditionalanimation.com for having me here, and everybody take care.
I can't now. I gotta finish my pants. Hey, fellas, listen to this letter. Gentlemen, that ain't for us. We're not gentlemen.
Hey, Joe, I need to borrow $20.
This is to inform
No.
you that unless overdue payments for tailoring equipment...
Come on, man, you know I'm good for it.
Good for it. You stole me $30 from 2 weeks ago. No!
Finance Corporation. I, Fleeson, president.
I promise I'll pay it all back as soon as I can.
You guys worry about that.
I don't trust you, and we're not friends anymore.
My pretty little face. What we need is a little music to cheer us up.
Well, there you have it. Thank you again for watching the Traditional Animation Show. It has been an amazing year, and I want to let every single one of you know that I will fight for hand-drawn animation until the day I die. Remember, don't settle for imitation. There is only one traditional animation. Be sure to share, comment, and let us know your animated thoughts. Until next time, I'm Lavelle Lee from traditionalanimation.com.